How does a story begin? Like most stories, with a boy too old to be a kid, and a boy too young to be a man, and a nightmare. Hello and welcome to the Friday Fantasy Show from the Bottled Imp, exploring the realms of fantasy. My name is Ken Boyter and today we're going to take a look at A Monster Calls, the film. Now this was released way back, well, only a couple of years ago, in 2016, and it was directed by, and I'm going to get his name wrong, I know, J.A. Bayyona. Bayyona? I don't know, I'm sorry. But this film is actually based on a novel by Patrick Ness, which in turn was based on an idea by Siobhan Dowd. So, we have done a couple of other reviews on this, but not the actual film, the book by Patrick Ness. So you can check them out on our channel. And also we did do an Imp chat. So Julian and myself, we actually went over to the cinema and watched it in the cinema. Let's find out what I thought. A Monster Calls, the film. What is the setup? Well, it does pretty closely follow the book. So sometimes, you know, when films get adapted from books, they don't always stick to exactly what's in the book, but this does. This pretty much mirrors it. And I think maybe that's got something to do with the fact that the screenplay is by the author as well, Patrick Ness. But the actual setup itself is, it's quite a heavy topic, this one. It all revolves around a young 12-year-old boy called Connor. And he is struggling. He is struggling big time, you could say, because his mother has a terminal illness. She has cancer. Now, it's one of those things where it's always implied what it is, and it's always implied that it's terminal, but they don't actually say that. But right from the start, it's pretty obvious that this is exactly the situation. There's no doubt about this. And what happens is we find Connor, who, you know, he's just an average everyday kid, and he goes to school and he has to, you know, sometimes get his own breakfast, and, you know, we see his mum and she's obviously got, you know, lack of energy and she might be in bed, and not, you know, he gets himself ready and off he goes. And initially you have that feeling that, yeah, this is just kind of an ordinary sort of situation, and you see straight away Patrick Ness in the screenwriting and the director, they do a great job, well, obviously, in the actors, of establishing the setup straight away. And so off he goes to school. He has a kind of average day at school, and then at night time he starts to have a nightmare, and it's 7 minutes past midnight, and he starts to have this nightmare, and it's all about this monster, and his monster is coming towards him over the dale, if you like, because he lives sort of in a sort of really nice small village, and his house overlooks like this hill and this big yew tree. And part of the nightmare is that he can hear this thudding coming towards him. And I remember having exactly the same sort of nightmares, thinking, I think it was because I watched King Kong, which, strangely enough, there is a bit of a reference, King Kong, in this film as well, about, you know, it's another monster. And this monster, so I used to think, oh, this monster's going to come and get me. It was going to, you know, come to my window and actually come through and kind of grab me like King Kong and pull me out of my bed. Well, that doesn't quite happen just straight away. What happens is they build it up nicely, so you get a little trickle of the noise, and say maybe a pen falls off of his desk, and then yes, there is a knocking at the window and a monster calls. Not on the phone, obviously. He's actually there, and he is basically there to take Connor, and you're kind of like, oh my god, what is this? This is a horrific, big, scary monster, and he is, you know, he's a big creature. And it's a tree creature, it's a tree monster. And the monster says to Connor, I'm going to tell you 3 stories. And Connor's like, well, what is all this about? This is crazy. You know, I want you to, you know my mum's situation, do you? And he was like, yes. I want you to help my mum. And he's going, I'm going to tell you 3 stories. And he's complaining, like, why would that actually help me in this situation? And then the monster also says, and you must tell me the 4th story. You're going to be telling me your story, Connor, and you're going to be telling me the truth. Now, at that point, it doesn't make any sense to Connor at all. And he then, that's pretty much the exchange, the first exchange that we see of Connor and the monster. And then he wakes up. Or so you kind of are led to believe that he wakes up, because there's that lovely crossover of, did that actually happen or did it not happen? And there's a little bit of evidence, that they kind of plant that you think, maybe it isn't real, maybe it is real. But obviously as the film develops, you kind of get more and more into, what is real and what isn't real. There are loads of themes, as you can imagine, with a film like this. It's a heavy topic. Anyone that's, my heart goes out to you if you've had to deal with this situation yourself at whatever age, then you will understand definitely, the situation that Connor is in. And not only Connor, obviously, all of the family that what they're going through. Now, this film is seen directly through the eyes of a 12-year-old, through Connor. And so everything is perfectly pitched with this film in terms of what he oversees. At one point, he does see his mother and his grandmother arguing, but it's all kind of muffled. He's in another room and then they're in another room, and he's kind of watching them through a door as he's making tea, and you can hear this muffling, and he can't quite understand every word and catch exactly what they're saying. And for me, that was a brilliant way to the point of view from a 12-year-old boy, because you don't get everything. You're a boy. You don't fully understand the world yet, and to see adults talking like that, something's up, but you don't know what it's about, so you can't process it properly. So as I say, there's a lot of heavy themes that run through this, and one of them is helplessness, because obviously, forget being a kid in this situation, anybody in this situation is going to be helpless. You are obviously in the hands of the professionals, of the doctors. You are in the hands of, if you believe in God, then in God. You're in the hands of luck. You're in the hands of, of nothing, really. If you believe that there's nothing out there, then that's it. If you've got cancer and you can't fight it off, then what can you do? And that is such a horrible feeling, and it's excellently portrayed. What also happens is that when you have that sense of helplessness, it's all out of your control. So what can you do? How can you gain control? And that just leads to frustration. And then that could also then lead to anger. And if you're not processing that properly, if you're not expressing it properly, if you're not talking about it, if you're not doing something to release this anger, that can then lead to suppressed anger. There's also a really kind of poignant theme of isolation as well, because obviously if you're feeling helpless, you could also start to feel isolation. And because, he's a 12-year-old boy, unfortunately at school he gets bullied, so he's isolated there in that world. He's isolated at home because obviously his mum has got this illness and she has to go off to hospital every now and again for treatment. He's isolated from his father because his father now lives abroad and has started a new family. And in fact, the father does come over in the film and in the book, obviously, and they start to interact. And so you get a real nice feeling of, yes, this is kind of what it could have been, because his father's actually a really good father in terms of a nice guy. It's just unfortunate that he and Connor's mother couldn't work it out. They just weren't right for each other. But if the father is actually a really nice father, and it's just such a shame he lives so far away, because he couldn't give everyday support. Whereas, yes, even though the mother and father are split up, I'm sure the father would step in, most days to help out. But unfortunately for Connor, that isn't the case. So again, there's that isolation from another family member. Now, the other family member is his grandmother, and his grandmother is a very strict person. Old-fashioned values, very strict, just different generation. And so again, there's that clash of generations. There's that isolation that they feel. And although it's through Connor's eyes, you still get the sense that each of those family members are isolated from themselves, because the father comes over, he doesn't bring the family, it's just him. The mother, yes, she loves her mother, i.e. the strict grandmother, but again, there's some clashes there, because again, they're slightly different people. And then you get the grandmother who, we don't know what's happened to the grandfather, but, he's actually died, yeah. So again, she's on her own, she's isolated, and again, and she must be feeling helpless. How does she cope with her own daughter, potentially dying of cancer? So you have all of those strands running through with isolation. Understanding as well. This film is one of those, coming of age is kind of the right term for this, but it's kind of not, because with coming of age, it's all about that understanding. You are somebody that is growing up in a world that you just have no idea really of. You're learning pretty much every day about people, about the way things work, about society, about systems. And it can be confusing, it can be, depressing, it can be happy, it can, it's all these emotions that are jostling around as you try to find your identity in amongst all of this new world that you're discovering, every day pretty much. And of course, so there's that understanding of what it actually is when somebody is dying. I mean, 12-year-old, would you have a clue of what this is like? I mean, even when you're an adult, it's really difficult to comprehend that. So there is the sort of growing up normal anxiety pains that you might have about, maybe getting bullied at school, or pressure of homework, or just being liked, and having friends. But then on top of that, you've got one of the, the mainstay of your family, the one person that, should be there for you, potentially might not be there for you, in the end. So you have all of that runs through as well. Plus then, as I say, there was that anger. Now, anger is quite a strong theme that runs through it. In fact, it's probably one of the main themes, maybe if the main theme. And definitely suppressed anger, because you've got to release your anger somehow. And I remember when my parents split up when I was, I think, about 6-7 years old, I pent up a lot of anger. And my way of expressing it, I had two ways. One was I used to just go into the living room, I can laugh about it now, and just smash everything off the coffee table and then walk out. And that was kind of me just expressing, I just had to release this anger. And two, I used to do a daily scribble. So I used to just kind of sit down and just scribble away, just draw away. And that seemed to be a good release as well for my anger. And strangely enough, in the film, Connor is a talented artist. He draws this monster, he draws the tree monster. And he learned throughout the film that his mother was also a talented artist as well. And so she wanted to go to art school, but for one thing or another she couldn't, i.e. she had Connor. So there's a slight overlap of guilt there that he feels as well. But there's a lovely connection with his art and her art as well. So you've got that, how do you express your anger? How does that come out? Is it through, can you talk about it? That obviously helps a lot. What about sports? Doing sports just to get rid of that pent up anger. Or, as I say, doing creative things. What you shouldn't really do is, because it will always find a way out, is just suppress it. And unfortunately for Connor and the other family members as well, that's kind of what happens. Escapism and stories, that's another strong theme, as you can imagine, because the monster does indeed come back and tell him 3 stories. And it just shows, how, and Connor's like, well, how is this helping me? But it does, because through stories you can there's a sense, some of them have a sense of wisdom in them as well that you can learn. Plus, it kind of lets us accept situations if we can take on board what they're saying. And stories can stay with you for a long time. I remember some stories as a kid that just stuck with me, that just kind of helped me in certain situations. And it's escapism. If you've got a really, really heavy issue that's bugging you in your life and, making you unhappy, just chilling out, just sort of switching off, just distracting yourself can really, really help that. So that's where, forget if it's fantasy or not, but obviously, I personally like to escape into a fantasy world because obviously, well, not obviously, but that's just kind of what I like. Some people go off into, murder mysteries or detective stories or sci-fi. Whatever it is, they're all stories, and stories are just an ancient tradition that we've always passed on in cultures throughout the world, since we basically could communicate. So overall, wow, what a fantastic film. I know this is quite a heavy film, and it's a mixture of kind of, dealing with tough, realistic issues, but also exploring how stories and, well, in this case, fantasy can really help you and can really set you thinking. And maybe not straight away, but once your brain can process it, will unlock a few things that could potentially help you. The acting is superb. Really, really impressed with the acting. Lewis McDougall is the boy that plays Connor, and he's absolutely superb. I think it might have even been his first feature film. We have the voice of the monster, which is by Liam Neeson. I always get them confused. Liam Neeson. Again, like a really sort of, old, well, he's not old himself, but, like a wise, deep, just exactly what you want in a kind of in a scary monster, but also in a wise monster. Kind of one of those Gandalf figures that it can be slightly unpredictable, but you ultimately know you are safe with the monster, even though it kind of scares you into really, some home truths. The animation, because each story is actually animated, is superb. I genuinely wanted just to have a whole film of that, a whole, hour and a half of this animation of just fantasy tales. That I would have loved that. They've taken so much time and effort and care with this film. All the actors are brilliant. Sigourney Weaver plays the grandmother. She's brilliant as well. And I forget who plays the mother. That's really terrible of me. Let me just quickly find out. It is Felicity Jones, and she is fantastic as well. They give such sympathetic and empathetic performances. It's just a way of how fantasy can really, when people say, "Oh, fantasy isn't real," this is real. This is kind of real fantasy, if you like. And I'm surprised because it did make its money back, but it had a box office of about 43 million, and it made something like it grossed 47 million, and I'm not sure why that is. I think it's because, is this a kids' film or is it an adult film? And I kind of would err on maybe it's more of an adult film. Kids, if you're reading the book, you might get more out of it, but in terms of enjoyment, I did enjoy it. But not on a kind of ha-ha entertainment level or wow, isn't that amazing, fantasy, epic quest, Lord of the Rings type way. But it was just one of those films that you feel like everybody should see this, It's like Schindler's List in this respect because it deals with heavy issues, but done in such a poignant and sympathetic way that you've come out feeling, yeah, that's kind of changed me a little bit. And I cried with this. It is a bittersweet ending, and it's one of those films that you just really, really should see. It got brilliant critical response, though. It got very good reviews, and I can totally understand why. Definitely recommend A Monster Calls. A Monster Calls, fantastic film. They've done a superb job of adapting it from the book. So if you've not read the book or you've not seen the film, thoroughly recommend that you do. And, it would be one of those films that you can watch with your children as well. I would recommend probably, what is it? It's a 12. I was going to say 10 might be a little bit young, but 12 definitely. It's one of those really important films, and it just goes to show that fantasy is important to, in our lives, I think. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you've enjoyed that. We have got a plethora of other reviews as well. We also have a brand new show called the Bottled Imp Show. Yes, and it comes out every Monday. Now we're doing them in series, so we're doing 8 episodes. So check them out. We've got a playlist on our YouTube channel about that, and they are a lot of fun. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, remember to keep it unreal, especially if you're a monster.